Hello, folks. You must have heard it somewhere that there is going to be another housing crisis like it happened in 2008, or maybe even bigger. The question is, why is it so, or is this news true or false? But you don't need to worry about it. The answer to all the questions is in today's video. First, let us understand what is housing crisis. According to experts, when the housing market exhibits severe failures in a specific location and period, it is referred to as a housing crisis. The meaning of the phrase has changed significantly depending on the speaker and the circumstance. For instance, a common usage nowadays alludes to housing scarcities in the US and other nations, but it has also been used to characterize financial catastrophes involving the real estate industry. In accordance with the first description, major housing shortages in certain places where people wish to dwell are presently referred to as the housing crisis or affordability crisis in the United States and other English-speaking nations. These shortages have resulted in increased regional homelessness, unstable housing, and expensive housing, partly due to regulatory obstacles to new building. The phrase housing crisis has been used in this context to refer to a variety of situations with various origins and outcomes. But what are the causes of housing problems? Many factors like changes in family and household structure, increase in population, demand-supply discrepancies, shift in urban-rural ratio, kucha houses, and increase in slum dwellers, to name a few, contribute greatly to housing shortage in quantitative terms. First and foremost, it's critical to recognize the severity of the present housing crisis. More than 1.8 billion people will not have access to suitable housing by the end of 2022. At least 150 million people are homeless for good. Every year, 15 million individuals are forcibly removed from their homes on average. To address the situation, the United States needs 6.5 million houses, and that figure is growing every day. In order to reduce the backlog of people residing in public housing, the United Kingdom requires 4.3 million dwellings across the pond. Not even economies that are supposed to be robust have been able to resolve the housing issue. It's simple to attribute the housing crisis on the COVID-19 pandemic's shutdown of the world economy, but the issue is actually far more complicated. The epidemic undoubtedly had an influence, but we also need to consider the effects of labor shortages, climate change, and a lack of building materials. Thanks to average mortgage rates remaining at more than double what they were in 2020 and 2021, and home prices staying sky-high, housing activity remains stagnant. Existing home sales are at their lowest levels since the height of the foreclosure crisis in 2010, and mortgage demand has dropped to lows not seen in over 2 decades. At the same time, we continue to live in an economically uncertain period. Household debt, led by mortgages, credit cards, and student loans, recently surpassed $17 trillion. On top of that, inflation remains above the Federal Reserve's 2% target rate, and a recession is still possible in 2024. This begs the question, could the housing market be on the verge of a crash? Forbes Advisor asked several housing experts for their predictions on where the housing market might head in the next 5 years. While most experts expect the housing market will come back into balance, there are warning signs for what may lie ahead. Among the differences between today's housing market and the 2008 housing crash is that lending standards are much tighter now due to lessons learned and new regulations enacted after the last crisis. Essentially, that means those approved for a mortgage nowadays are less likely to default than those who were approved in the pre-crisis lending period. In the lead-up to the Great Recession, the housing market had been fueled by rapid credit expansion, increased leverage, and household expectations for house price growth that proved to be too optimistic. Unlike a fixed-rate mortgage, an adjustable-rate mortgage's interest rate changes periodically after an initial fixed-rate period. Homeowners who took out adjustable rate mortgage leading up to the 2008 crisis got hit with payment shock once the interest rates reset, and many couldn't make the higher monthly payments. This brings up another important distinction between 2008 and today. Most borrowers now have fixed-rate mortgages. As a result, even though mortgage rates have doubled, current homeowners are seeing no change in their monthly principal and interest payments. But who is affected by the housing crisis? The housing crisis affects individuals and communities across various socioeconomic backgrounds, encompassing both renters and homeowners. Low-income families struggle with rising rents and insufficient affordable housing options, often facing the threat of eviction or homelessness. Middle-class households face barriers to home ownership due to skyrocketing property prices and stagnant wages, forcing many to live in overcrowded or substandard conditions. Additionally, the housing crisis exacerbates disparities in access to education, healthcare, and employment opportunities, perpetuating cycles of poverty and inequality. As housing costs continue to outpace income growth, the crisis extends its reach to include even those previously considered financially stable, highlighting the systemic nature of the issue and the urgent need for comprehensive solutions. As we have understood the problem, now we also look at its solution. Here we get 5 policies which will help us in this problem. Let's understand which are those policies. Governments at the local level have started responding by upzoning single-family areas like in Berlin, Germany, in order to allow the construction of up to several units per lot. These kinds of policies also promote social inclusion. The downside of such initiatives is lack of scale. Densifying smaller lots is time-consuming and has limited impact. Immigration policies have an effect on housing production as the construction industry heavily relies on immigrant workers. Consequently, looser immigration policies can reduce housing costs by lowering developing costs and abating labor shortages. Financial incentives are required to stimulate both the supply and demand side's low-interest loans, and tax abatements are effective tools. Not only can they buy down the overall capital costs on new housing projects and renovation, but they can also assist with conversions of obsolete offices and hotels into residential. Recently announced measures by New York Governor Kathy Hochul are a step in the right direction. Cities worldwide continue to turn prominent streets to pedestrian only. The plan for Paris's Champs-Élysées will increase foot traffic in key urban arteries. This unlocks the potential for highly valuable commercial space. Municipalities ought to aim for additional commercial units. With retail values shooting up, property tax revenues will follow. This extra income can be used to create affordable housing. Much has been said about the Parisian 15-minute city or Melbourne's 20-minute neighborhoods. As city centers become increasingly denser and with locals rediscovering their immediate neighborhoods during lockdowns, municipalities must continue to decentralize. Much developable land lays untapped outside of the urban core. For potential homebuyers, down payment assistance programs exist, but are hard to obtain and penalizing when bidding for a property. Loosening banking regulations to allow smaller down payments can ease this burden on buyers and help ensure homeownership is more attainable for the middle class. There is no reason for 0-10% down payment loans to be more accessible in Europe than in the US. In the current low-rate environment, with fixed rates and no teaser rates, low down payment loans will not create a new subprime crisis. NIMBY, which means not in my backyard, and anti-business measures have worsened the problem, but the pandemic has coincidentally created a perfect environment to start fresh. After the political bickering of recent years, public officials must now work hand in hand with the private sector for the greater social good. With this, time is of the essence. For 0-10% down payment loans to be more accessible in Europe than in the the U.S. In the current low-rate environment,